Hi, my name is Jasmine, and in today's video I'm going to share with you about Herodion National Park. At Hirojun, King Herod the Great challenged the forces of nature. In the 1st century BCE, the great builder created one of the most daring structures of the ancient world, Herodion National Park. King Herod the Great was born in 74 BCE to an influential family of Edomian origin. During the Hashmonean period, many Edomians converted to Judaism and entered the service of the kingdom. Herod's grandfather Antipas was governor of Idumea under the Hashmonean King Alexander Jannaeus. Herod's father Antipater was an advisor to John Hyrcanus II. Much of what we know of Herod's life comes from the writings of Jewish historian Josephus Flavius. In 45 BCE, Herod was appointed ruler of the Galilee, and in that same year he married the first of his 10 wives. After the Sanhedrin tried him for executing Jewish rebels in Galilee, he was forced to flee, but under the aegis of the Romans, he conquered the rest of the country, and in 37 BCE became the king of Judea, which he governed until he died in 4 BCE. Herod, whose reign marked the end of the Hashmonean dynasty, ruled under Roman auspices but with a great deal of autonomy. Herod the Builder. King Herod was famed for his grandiose building projects in the land of Israel and beyond, including the rebuilding of the temple and the expansion of the Temple Mount Esplanade in Jerusalem. In addition to founding cities like Caesarea, and Samaria, he built the port of Caesarea as well as palaces, temples, gardens, and water systems, and strengthened desert fortresses. The king's construction projects revealed his vision and organizational skills, while his use of new techniques and technologies, such as concrete, led his architectural achievements to new heights. No wonder Pliny the Elder described Herod's Jerusalem as the most famous city in the East. Judea prospered during his reign. Hirojun is the only site that is named after King Herod the Great. It was known by the Crusaders as the Mountain of Franks. Arab locals call it Mountain of Paradise. Hirojun, one of Herod the Great's most ambitious building projects, served the Judean king 37 to 4 BCE as summer palace, fortress, monument, burial ground, and district capital. Of all the sites built by the builder king, Herodion is the only one that bears his name. The immense Hirojun complex, 15 kilometers south of Jerusalem and about 5 kilometers southeast of Bethlehem, near the ancient roads to the Dead Sea and close to the settlement of Tekoa, the birthplace of the prophet Amos in the Bible. Hirojun is a volcano-like hill with a truncated cone located near the city of Bethlehem in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Herod the Great built a fortress and a palace on the top of Herodium and may have been buried there. Herodium is 758 meters, 2,487 feet above sea level. In 40 BCE, after the Parthian conquest of Syria, Herod fled to Masada. On the way, at the location of Herodion, Herod clashed with the Parthians and emerged victorious. According to the Roman Jewish historian Josephus, he built a town on that spot in commemoration of his victory and enhanced it with wonderful palaces, and he called it Herodion after himself. Josephus described Hirojun as follows: this fortress, which is some 60 stadia distant from Jerusalem, is naturally strong and very suitable. Now, I'm going to tour you to the Bathhouse. On the northwest side of the palace fortress was a bathhouse, relatively lavish by comparison to those from Herod's other palaces. It was Herod who introduced the Roman custom of bathing to this part of the world. The whole complex was excavated, and it comprises 2 apodyteria, entry and changing rooms, a large caldarium, a hot room, a tepidarium, tepid room or laconium or sweet room, and a small frigidarium called room. The circular tepidarium, 4 meters in diameter, was also decorated with frescoes and covered by a dome which is almost intact. It is the earliest of its type to have survived in the area. The frigidarium, by contrast, is slightly irregular shaped as a result of being incorporated into the circular outer mantle of the overall structure. As was common in Herodian royal palaces, this room included a step pool which may have served as a ritual bath, a mikveh. The bathhouse floors were decorated with bright geometric mosaics. Herodion Fortress, Herod's Palace. Herod himself commissioned a lavish palace to be built between 23 and 15 BCE atop Hirojun for all to see. The palace itself consisted of 4 towers of 7 stories, a bathhouse, courtyards, a Roman theater, banquet rooms, a large walkway, and extravagant living quarters for himself and guests. Once Herod died and the revolt started, Hirojun was abandoned. The Jews eventually had a base at Hirojun where they built a synagogue, which they can still be seen today, unlike much of Herod's palace. The palace is a square building encompassed by a circular wall. The palace included an ornamental garden surrounded by a colonnaded peristyle, a bathhouse, several living rooms, and a reception and banqueting hall. The palace were decorated with frescoes depicting geometric patterns. The bathhouse was built following Roman bathing rules. On November 29, 2018, news broke out of Jerusalem that a ring had been discovered at Herod the Great's eponymous mountain fortress of Herodion. 2 facts about the simple copper alloy piece of jewelry were reason for worldwide headlines. First, the ring was discovered at Hirojun in 1969. The ring was actually unearthed during an excavation led by the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. However, only recently did a thorough cleaning and advances in photographic technology allow for the second interesting fact about this ring to be exposed. It bears the Greek inscription, the name of Pontius Pilate. Let's go now to the subterranean water cisterns at Hirojun. The water supply of the palace fortress was based primarily on recollection of the rainwater falling on the hill. This was stored in various water cisterns, one atop the watertight base of the eastern tower and 2 smaller ones under the palace chambers. Another 3 cisterns, which collected rainwater from the hills slopes, were exposed adjacent to the monumental stairway. From here, the water was raised in jars and water skins to the large middle cistern hewn into the hilltop and poured into it via a spout. It could then be drawn directly by rope and bucket from the palace courtyard. In times when the water in the cistern were empty, water would be brought from lower Hirojun, where the aqueduct from Solomon's Pool, south of Bethlehem, provided a constant supply all year round. The Subterranean tunnel complex at Hirojun. During the period of the rebellions against the Romans, the rebels established a complex system of underground tunnels inside the Hirojun hill. During the first revolt, a steep tunnel was hewn to guarantee the water supply to the palace fortress in times of Roman siege, making it possible to carry water from the lower cisterns up to the fortress without exposure to the enemy. During the later Bar Kokhba revolt, further complex tunnels were dug, connecting the earlier cisterns with one another. This led from the fortress to hidden openings which allowed surprise attacks on Roman units scaling the hill. 2 of these openings were uncovered next to the Herodion royal tomb. As opposed to the narrow and restricted tunnel complex from the Judean Shpela, the Herodium tunnels were broad, with high ceilings allowing for rapid movements of armed soldiers. The tunnel diggers dumped the spoil into the empty cisterns already out of use at the time. For 60 years, most of the period following the first revolt, Hirojun was abandoned apart from brief periods when the Roman garrison was stationed on the hilltop. During the Bar Kokhba revolt, the rebels took over the fortress palace, which stood partly ruined. Excavations in the fortress palace have uncovered various remains from the Bar Kokhba period, including a large coin hoard and a subterranean tunnel complex carved out during the revolt. The tunnel system differs from the typical Bar Kokhba period systems in the Judean coastal plain. Catapult stones in Hirojun. Catapult stones gathered and piled by archaeologists. The stones were used by the Romans who hauled them up to Herodion with ballista when they besieged the Jewish zealots who were fighting them in the Great Revolt 66 to 73 AD. The zealots rolled them down the hill on the Roman soldiers' head. Hirojun was built as a fortress palace. 2 of the exits from this system of assault tunnels have been uncovered near the remains of what is now to be believed to have been the site of Herod's tomb. Exiting the underground complex, we came across head restorer who told us with a grin that he was building antiquities, restoring the small royal theater where Herod would have entertained his special guest. Here, too, a monumental staircase was discovered. Adjacent to that were the remains of what was identified by Professor Ehud Netzer as Herod's Mausoleum. Professor Netzer, 1934-2010, was a world expert on Herodium architecture and the driving force behind the development of Herodion as one of the national parks. He had researched for many years for King Herod's tomb. Many of his predecessors had believed that the tomb was in one of the towers of the palace fortress. Netzer believed that the mausoleum would be found outside at the foot of the mountain. That was how he discovered the lower city, which described. However, he did not find the tomb, and he therefore began to search on the artificial slopes. In 2007, he began to excavate the slanted wall that encircled the mountain, Halfway up its steep slope, he believed that if he dug along this wall, he would eventually find the tomb. After many months of digging, nothing had yet been discovered, and so Netzer decided to take a break for a few months, clean up the excavation area, and prepare the reports on the finds from the lower Herodion for publication. Reportedly, he remarked to one of his colleagues that the tomb might be cursed and that when he finally discovered it, something bad would happen. During the cleanup operations, a fragment of a reddish stone sarcophagus decorated with a carved rosette was discovered, as well as the remains of two other white stone sarcophagi so magnificent that he was convinced that they could only have come from King Herod's tomb. Shortly afterwards, the excavation team unearthed ornamental carved stones and the remains of a monumental building. Eventually, the base of the mausoleum itself was discovered on the northeastern slope of the mountain facing Jerusalem and close to the monumental staircase. The mausoleum itself was destroyed during the Great Rebellion against Rome, and the sarcophagus of the much-hated king was smashed to smithereens by the rebels. Such was the loathing felt for the usurper. After the discovery of the mausoleum, Professor Netzer continued to excavate the surrounding area, excavations which led to the discovery of a small theater with room for about 400 spectators and a lavishly decorated chamber, which probably served the king and his guests. Professor Netzer sat down to rest and leaned against a railing, which gave way, hurling him down to the theater below, where he struck his head. He died 3 days later at the age of 76.
And this theater was my work as well. But it's doomed now. The king has decided to alter Herodion altogether and transform the whole mountain into his mausoleum. Can you hear them? Those are the workers about to begin the demolition. Oh, what a pity. So few people had time to admire the artwork that decorates these walls. I remember well the exact moment when Herod gave the order to create them. He returned from one of his journeys with news. In just a few months, Marcus Agrippa, the emperor's second in command, would come on a royal visit, and he will be hosted here too, in Herodion. The palace was in a state of frenzied anticipation. The king gave orders to prepare for the visit by meeting the standards that Agrippa was accustomed to in Rome. The finest wine, preserved apples from Italy, fish sauce from Spain. But the most important task of all was the redecoration of the theater's royal hall. The king has his own reasons. He knows that even artwork can sometimes have political significance. The first thing the artists had to do was replaster the walls. After that, they sculpted the upper part of the room in stucco relief, a special kind of plaster. What a marvelous decoration it is. It gives the flat wall depth, like stone carvings. The artists divided the space of the walls with plaster columns, decorated with leaves and crowned by capitals. Between the columns, high up the walls, they designed windows with wooden blinds open to the view. Look carefully. They are not real windows, but paintings of windows hung on the walls. In all his building projects, Herod avoided images of animals or people in obedience to biblical prohibition. But here, in this room, Herod made an exception to that custom. He gave orders to paint views of Egypt and the Nile, selected especially for the guest. After all, the conquest of Egypt by the emperor's army under Agrippa's command symbolizes the unity of the empire. Look, goats on a rocky cliff with a cypress tree and a shrine. And here a crocodile slides into the Nile. And this picture, a bull under a big tree in a pasture. And in the background, a boat at sea. And the colors are so vibrant and natural. Paintings like this were rare, even in Rome. For my workers, finishing the work before the visit seemed an impossible task. But Herod never accepted impossible as an option. Behold, the big moment has arrived. Marcus Agrippa, the emperor's second in command, has entered the harbor of Caesarea. The city was festively decorated, and crowds came out to greet the illustrious guest. And here began the journey that Herod had planned for Agrippa, into the heart of Judea, to the edge of the desert, to Herodion. As the visit progressed, Agrippa was more and more amazed. He did not expect to find such splendor and grandeur at the remote edge of the empire. He smiled with pleasure when he identified the wine from a famous Italian vineyard as his own favorite back home. But Herod had one more surprise for Agrippa, the high point of all his gestures of esteem. Herod led him to the second floor of the royal guest hall. Agrippa was deeply moved as he stood in front of a painting of a naval battle. He recognized it at once. The Battle of Actium, his greatest triumph, where he defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, handing Egypt to the Emperor Augustus on a silver platter. The depiction was so vivid that Agrippa's memories came flooding back, and for a brief moment, he felt the painting's come to life. Oh, King Herod, he knew how to please those he needed to, but also to arouse fear. This cruel man was enormously talented, a lion and a fox in one. His reign was remarkable. The kingdom flourished, trade prospered, people lived well. Despite the venomous criticism aimed at him, I always thought we should not forget the greatness of the man who changed Judea more than all his predecessors. But years go by, and the king feels his end is near, and the show will not go on forever. So he has brought us here, again, to this very room, but this time to demolish it, to cover it with earth, and turn the entire mountain into the eternal mausoleum of Herod, king of Judea. The royal hall has now become the sleeping quarters of the demolition crew. In the last days of the theater, everyone tries to leave his mark on these walls. One etches a maze or a rosette. Another draws a boat with a piece of charcoal. I, too, feel that my end is near. This will apparently be my last assignment. But before I leave this world, I would like to learn one thing. Is it true that everything is destined to disappear with time? In 2,000 years from now, will anyone still know who Herod, king of Judea, was? Who knows? Perhaps somewhere, far into the unforeseeable future, this theater will again be full of people, and the sounds of talk and music. Who knows?